I think that you have a very interesting history, and I have some questions that I can extract from your history.
Yeah.
For example, the one question I think is how do you live the transition in technology equipment. How do you start recording with? What are your methods in the past, in the present?
Oh, what, you mean how has it changed?
Yeah, the changes.
That's a really difficult question. Because I've seen all this thing, change from like starting at 4-track, and you really, I can't really give you a simple answer because it's changing all the time. And there's two things. You're making creative engineering based on the equipment that is being used, the equipment that's popular at the time, and the music is different. So everything over the years, it's changing all the time. I often find it when some people are making music in 2018 and they think, well, I'd like to use equipment from the 60s, right? But that sound in the 60s was that equipment, but it was also that music. And I actually don't agree with a lot of that. I like to say, okay, we used that equipment then for that music, and now we're doing different music. If somebody wanted to do, we're going to do a remake of a 60s song, then sure, go ahead and use old equipment. But if you're doing like something that is very new now, like rap or hip hop, why would you want to use 1960s equipment? So I slightly disagree with that. I like to. One of the things I like to do, and I don't know whether this is really the question that you're asking.
The question is how the method changed over the years with the new technology.
The method, changes with the equipment that you're using and the style of music. So, I like to use, we're recording in Pro Tools, and I like to mix in the box. And I don't use very, very little or no outboard gear. Because I have this crazy thing that analog was, when I started, analog was stereo, mono stereo, 4-track, and 8-track. Then, so up to 8-track, okay, 8 channels of audio into an 8-track machine. It's fine. But then it went to 16 and 24, and when you went to 24, it was, oh no, there's too much noise. We need some noise reduction. So now we have to bring in Dolby, right? Because there were too many tracks. But analog wasn't made for that many tracks. It was only made for 4-track or 8-track. So you needed to assist it by using Dolby. Then after that, it moved from that to digital tape, like a 24-track digital tape. So that was fine. That got rid of the noise. But you're still using, and then it went 48 tracks of digital, but you're still using 24 tracks or 48 tracks of analog. So really, when I went to do movies in America, they were just beginning to record things with Pro Tools, and they would mix to like Pro Tools would work for 8 channels for a mix down. But the multi-track was still tape. And one of the people I was working with on a film, I said, we were friendly with the one of the managers of DigiDesign, which is now Avid. And I said, do you think it would be possible to build 48 tracks of Pro Tools? Would it work? And he said, well, no one's done it before, but, you know, we could try it. And as long as you have a backup, you know, have some tape backup. So I think I was probably the first person in LA to expand Pro Tools from 8-track to 48. And there were a lot of problems. I mean, there were difficulties with crashing and stuff. But eventually, you know, after 2 or 3 tries, we got it working. And then at that point, and it was very early, this was like maybe 1999 or just on 2000, I said, I don't want to use this anymore. I love this, but I want to say goodbye. I want to go use one of these to go into Pro Tools and then keep it in Pro Tools and deal with it. I don't want to go in, out. And I know this is very, very unpopular view, or not so, but, you know, some people want to do it, some people don't. That's fine, you know. But I still have this thing that analog, real good analog, should be like 4-track or 8-track. And if you get too many channels, I don't like it so much. So most of the things that I'm doing now and the things that we're working on, everything is in the box. And then it doesn't sound as good as analog. Okay?
It doesn't sound as
good as analog.
So do you think that analog...
So you have to figure it out. You have to say, why doesn't it sound as good as analog? You know? And is the electronics in analog helping you disguise a problem that you shouldn't be there? It's like a lot of people say, you know, if you use a lot of analog gear, it's glue. But I'll tell you another story that kind of influenced me. In 1978 or 79, that long ago, 78, at EMI we had a digital desk as a prototype. And I forget, I mean, it was something like 8-bit. And we did some tests with this desk, and it was built by the engineers at EMI. And we did some tests, and all the engineers listened, and they said, doesn't sound as good as analog. And everyone was right. It did not sound good because it was 8-bit and it was very early technology. But the guy who built the desk was a very big, very tall, very strong guy. And he got very upset, and he said to everybody in the room, he said, it's because you don't know how to use it. And he was talking to like all the engineers, and I was still very young at the time. And they all sort of, you know, we don't know how to use it. He said, because you're using your analog brain and your thoughts and your knowledge of how to record in analog, you're using that in a new digital world. And this was like so early, so long ago. This was like 1978. And I was still very young then, and I thought, what if he's right? What if you don't know how to use it? And half of your brain is still holding on to this You know, oh, I love it's so warm.
Yeah.
It's hot and it's warm. But what if 10% of what he said was correct? You don't know how to use it. So I like to try and find a way to use new things, not old things.
But do you think that analog is superior in sound than digital?
I think, yeah. I mean, it helps. It makes life easier because it brings some harmonic distortion, and it brings some saturation that helps. But I think, you know, it's different. You know, everyone likes different things, and it's a color. This gives a color, that gives a color, and you can choose a color. And then if you choose not to use it, and you're mixing inside digital, it sometimes can be more difficult. You know, but it's definitely more work to get that kind of sound in digital. But I think that if you're working on you know, on new music, and music is very dictated by the gear. You know, like all through my life, you know, people say, here is a new piece of equipment, and people say, oh, I want to play with this new piece of equipment, and they start making music that is influenced not by the music, but influenced by the new equipment. It's the way it's been.
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the things is you can't say this is better than that. It's just everybody likes to make creative decisions. But I do think that outboard gear makes life easier, for sure, because it kind of sorts out a lot of problems.
And about, you say a few minutes ago that if you want, for example, to receive a 60 band, you can go to old equipment and use it.
Yeah.
And why don't to use Pro Tools, for example, to record a 60 band?
No, you can. I didn't say you can't. You can do that. Yeah, you can do that. But I think that that's what I'm saying. That the 60s music and 60s equipment were made. They go together. You know, and you know, if you take 60s music and record it in new, you could come up with something very different. I mean, if you go back to the Beatles, which is obviously a very strong influence on me at the beginning, when all their albums up till and including the White Album were all done on a valve mixer with only like 10 or 12 channels. And when we did Abbey Road, it was on a new desk that EMI made called a EMI TG desk, which was solid state and no valves. And so the first thing would be saying, oh, this desk doesn't have the warmth that the EMI red valve desks used to have. But the music was the Beatles didn't want to remake their older music. They wanted to make new music, and it's a new sound. So that's why I think that things are always, as things are getting newer, that new equipment and new music go together. That's the point that I'm making.
So there is a relationship between the music and the equipment.
Exactly.
Okay, and what are the milestones, under your point of view, of technology developed over the years, for example?
Well, I think obviously, as I said before, we'll repeat, what I was saying before, that as the tracks got more and more and desks went from being 12 faders to 24 faders to 48 and now beyond 96. Then you need help. So one of the tracks getting bigger, and then you're running out of noise floor. So a big milestone was Dolby, but that really wasn't, to me, that wasn't the answer. That was just like a band-aid fix, because now suddenly there's too many tracks and too much noise. But it was, it helped at the time. Then digital tape machines, that was a milestone. The Sony Dash machines was a big... and then, the biggest change was Pro Tools.
The digital software.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the other, not just Pro Tools, but all the other digital workstations that people are using. And then with each progressive thing, as the sampling rate gets higher and the analog conversion gets better, and also the clocking gets better.
Yeah.
They're all, it's constantly changing. So, you just have to kind of be interested in the new things that come along, I think.
And about the method and the philosophy of recording, how did it change as the equipment was developed?
Well, that's one negative thing. That's a really good question, and I think that's one thing where it went wrong, because when you had fewer tracks, you had to make final decisions all the time, right from the beginning.
In the moment.
In the moment. Make this decision, and keep it. Especially like when we were recording 4-track. You have to make every decision. And the one negative thing is now if you're working in Pro Tools, there is no track count. You can, if you exceed the track count, just get another card.
Yeah.
Or another rig,
There is not track limit.
Yeah, there are people I know in film scoring who are mixing things with 1,000 tracks or more on different, 2 or 3 Pro Tools rigs all in sync.
Yeah.
And not one decision until the end.
Yeah.
So that's really a bad step. So one of the things is you have to try and make some decisions as you go. And I know there are a lot of people who do this. Even if they're totally digital, totally in the box, they have the discipline to make decisions along the way. And that also creates a different kind of sound when you do that. And when you commit to something, and then you have to work with it instead of going back to the beginning each time.
And okay, I think that we speak a lot of equipments about music, the methods and philosophy. Okay, so now maybe I think that you can give us some tips about recording. For example, music, bands and classical music. So where do you want to start?
Okay.
In classical or
Yeah,
bands?
we can talk about classical music.
Yeah.
I think that usually, any recording I do, I probably put out about 30, 34, 36 microphones, because you have to really be covered for everything. But then I try to use about 6 or 7 or 8 only, and the others are all turned off until, I've had some recordings I do where we do it with about 8 microphones, and then we have another 28 that are just spare, and you might use one mic in the whole recording just once, but it's there. You can't do it. It's not responsible to, not do that. But so one of the things I feel is to use as few microphones as possible, and really try to keep it simple. And there's not a lot of time, with orchestra becomes very, very expensive. So you have to make a lot of decisions before you start. And a lot of the things that I do, there's no sound check. If the session starts at 10, we're recording at 10 o'clock. The first recording is made right at the beginning of the session. So it's all about research, and you plan in advance what you're going to do, and just hope that you made the right decisions. And one of the most difficult things to learn is to very, very quickly, if you got it wrong, you have to make a change immediately. Like, you have to say, this isn't going to work. And the worst thing you could possibly do is say, well, I don't know, it might be the speakers or it might be the room, I don't know, but I think it'll be all right. If you think it's wrong in the first, your first reaction is, I wonder if it's wrong, then it is wrong. For sure it's wrong. And if you're going to save that recording, you have to really, especially with an orchestra, you have to be really say, well, what's plan B? And you have to have a plan B ready, and say, okay, this was wrong. So that's the thing, and it's all about, for me, it's all about acoustics and mic positions, and like, is this too close, too far? And you just have to. You get that with experience.
And how do you solve the problems with the acoustics of the theater, for example?
It's you have to plan it in advance. I mean, you can do a lot with positioning, and if I'm going to a place that I haven't worked, I mean, now I'm working in a lot of places that I've already worked in, so I don't have to go to too many different places. But you just need to study it beforehand and figure out. I did about 18 months ago. I went to Qatar to do a record. They've got an orchestra in Qatar, and so that was a place that I'd never been to before, and I was very fortunate. They were doing a rehearsal, and for the first rehearsal, I didn't have to record anything, so I just sat there and listened to it, and looking at everything, and maybe it would be better if we had a curtain closed. Oh, they've got a curtain there, it's open, let's see if we can close that, or do this, or put carpet, or take it away. So before you start recording, all the best fixes are done before you start. Because there's not, with an orchestra, there's not too many things to do afterwards.
And have you got any standard of microphone positions, and then you change in each situation, or how do you plan it?
I plan it in two different ways. Sometimes if I'm working with somebody on a series of recordings and I know that they like that kind of sound, I have everything like memorized and written down, so I can repeat exactly the same thing, and we can create a sound for an artist and say, okay, we're going to do very similar thing, maybe a little variation, but the same thing. And I'll just use my memory and my experience and notes to get the same result. And then other times we're doing something new, with maybe a new person or somebody wants something that is different. And on those occasions, I don't use any notes at all. I just think, let's invent something, right? Let's do something that I haven't done before. And I've done that a few times in the last few years. And I always say, well, it's a bit dangerous because these things are so expensive. So I always have something that I know will work on another track, and, you know, as a safety. And then I'll do something that's totally new. And like people were saying, sometimes they'll ask me, oh, I've seen that microphone, I know this, or, you know, I've seen the Decca tree, or I've seen this, but I haven't seen that. And I'll go, well, I'm just making it up as I go. I'm inventing something. And if it doesn't work, then we'll use something else. But every now and then, I just want to do something totally new.
And have you, about your philosophy in recording classical music, is there any main point, for example, a Decca tree on a coincident pair of OR DF, and then you use support microphones for every zone? And how do you focus on it?
Well, there's, you know, if you read the technical books, there's a lot of techniques, and you just mentioned a few of them, and there are many more. And if you know, you study that kind of acoustic recording, and you think, well, I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story. A lot of people like the Decca tree. It's become very popular, and it came through listening to a lot of Decca recordings that they made. But the truth is that there are two things that many people now do not know. One is that the microphones in the Decca, original Decca recordings, were modified by the engineers at Decca. And what they did is a very close secret. They modified the power supplies, they modified the microphones. So, first of all, they had modified microphones. But more importantly, they had their technique where they invented the Decca tree. They were very serious about where they would record. They say, we will record with our Decca tree in this hall and this place, but we don't want to record here. And a lot of other people couldn't do that because they were said, we have to make the recording in this theatre. And you couldn't say, no. So that was a luxury that the Decca engineers had. So in my opinion, the Decca tree works really well in certain places, but not everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And in the places where it doesn't work very well, you have to look to something else. So one of the things is to be open-minded. And, you know, when you go to a new place, and you look around and you say, I don't think it would be very good in here. I think we need to do something different. And like you said, there are about maybe 5 or 6 really well-known and well-researched techniques, and they all work in certain places. But I personally do not believe that the Decca tree is the best in every single run.
Mm-hmm.
It was designed to work in certain places, and those places that where it has always worked best are very large and very opulent,
Mm-hmm.
and very generous in the sound. I think if you're recording in a small place with a low ceiling, you really don't want to use Decca tree. You want to do something else.
Mm-hmm. And about the other techniques of microphone, the AB, the coincident pairs,
Yeah.
do you use them?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And is there any favorite of you?
I tend to I like a Blumline pair
Uh-huh.
for not every, but I like to use it on video games because it really sounds great on a laptop. A Blumline pair on an orchestra sounds really good on a laptop or little earbuds.
Earphones, yeah.
Or small speak, you know, like computer playback. Because if you have a really great Decca tree recording, you need like really nice speakers and nice monitoring.
Yeah.
So that's another way to decide what should I use.
And you use the main point for the general capture of the sound.
Yes.
And then you use support microphones.
Yeah, as needed. Yeah.
And how many main points do you have in your classical recordings?
It depends. Sometimes only 2 mics, sometimes 5.
But do you divide in sectors by the instruments?
Only as a backup, you know, as a spare, not as a principal recording. It's kind of difficult to explain because it's so dependent on where the one thing I always do is a lot of like planning ahead to decide what method to use. But I would generally always try, like I said before, try for about 32, 34 microphones and aim to use like less than 10.
And if you could give us any recommendation for the beginners of classical recordings, what do you recommend us?
I think now, like one of my favorite microphones or manufacturers is there's a company in Pasadena in California called AEA, who make ribbon mic, and I really like ribbon mics.
Mm-hmm. You use all ribbon mics in your?
I use some, yeah, but not only.
Yeah.
Because with certain recordings, sometimes you need a little bit of the high end from either a tube mic or a condenser. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely, I think that, you know, a lot of people have asked me about the sound of the Lord of the Rings music. And two of the AEA ribbon mics were a very significant contribution to that. So I think that getting a pair of ribbon mics is really a good place to start. But the other thing is that with condensers, I don't think it's a good idea to go too cheap, you know, because some really like low-end condenser mics can sound not too good. So I would say, you know, for somebody who is just starting, try and get a pair of condenser mics as high-end as possible, and also have some ribbon mics as well.
So I see that you put a lot of importance in the microphone choose.
Yes.
For example, instead of the techniques, or they are both important.
I think the microphone choice and the positioning is the most important.
And about position, what could you recommend us?
That's impossible.
There is no answer.
No, because it's you really have to learn how to listen to something, and to be able to know in your head whether that is what you want or not. And you have to know with each microphone in different, whether it's condenser or dynamic or ribbon, like what is going to happen if I go further away or closer or higher or lower.
Yeah.
You know, like even just like going away from classical music, like doing vocals, you know, are you here? Are you here? Are you up here? What's the difference, you know, between being up here and being down there? And when you go to adjust a microphone, you have to know what it is that you want it to be in order to know which way to go. And I've done it many times. I said, you know, let's move the mic, and you say, okay, we're going to go from here. I'm talking about a vocal now. Go from here to here, and then you go in the control. No, that's the wrong way. It wasn't that. It was from there to there.
So there is no recipe in classical music.
No, the recipe is here.
About the microphones, the digital converters, what could you recommend us? Other than the ribbon microphones, which are your favorites?
I'm actually for converters, I'm actually okay with the Avid, the new, you know, the newest ones.
The DAD.
Yeah. And I think more important than converters is a really good clock. I've heard amazing difference with different clocks like Euphonics, and this is where I'm terrible with names.
Antelope.
Yeah. Edit. I really like the Antelope clock, and I think clocking is really, really important. But I think that the clocking is more significant change than some of the converters. But for mic pre's, I don't know, I like Millennia's a lot. And going back, I used to like the George Massenburg mic pre's a lot. And even though they're quite old, I still like the sound of those. But I think of the new ones, I'd say the Millennials are my favourite.
And the microphones, which are your favourites?
Okay.
The AEA?
AEA, obviously.
And in condenser?
Still Neumann.
Neumann.
Still Neumann.
But omnidirectional, cardioid?
I think you need a bit of everything. You need to have, like, you can't just, you know, I think that if you needed very few microphones, you're better to get multi-pattern.
Yeah.
You know, because it's impossible to say, do I need cardioid or omni or figure eight? Sometimes you need, for acoustics, you need all of them. So I think if someone was only getting very few microphones, I'd say get multi-pattern and experiment with the pattern.
And about the sample rate, do you have any special sample rate?
96.
96, okay.
Yeah. And also the other interesting thing on Pro Tools is 32-bit floating point. I like that. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, for processing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And about, for example, recording the Beatles with Joe Emmerich and George Martin.
Yeah.
How was these records? Could you tell us something about these records?
Well, you know, I just only worked on the Abbey Road album and their solo albums. But it's really like a recap of, you know, what I said earlier, that it was all about making a lot of final decisions fairly early on and just being, you know, letting the equipment was designed, you know, we had outboard gear made on request to work with that music. So it's all to do, like what I said about the new music and new equipment going together and being, the Beatles never wanted to recreate something they did before. They wanted to create something they hadn't done before. And so that was, I think, probably the most exciting thing, because everything that I was hearing was brand new. And that was very influential for me. I think the other main thing that it is most important is I don't think that you can record or mix if you're not having a great time. You really have to enjoy every minute of it, even if there are problems. I remember in the 60s, on the Beatles sessions, you know, there would be a lot of breakdowns because we had valve equipment, and even though we had guys who maintained it, would still go noisy valve, and we'd have to take a break and say, we're going to be fixing this equipment. And one of the guys who worked there at the studios, he would come in and he knew that the technicians needed about 10 to 15 minutes to repair this thing. And he would start telling jokes, right? And he was like just one joke after the other and just kept everybody laughing so that the mood didn't drop, because it could have been really bad. Like, oh, another technical breakdown, and how long is it going to take?
Yeah.
And the thing I remember about those days is he just kept going with these stupid jokes one after the other. And then the technical guy says, we're ready. We're okay.